Hello, this is #1 New York Times best-selling author Mick Foley telling you that inside the squared circle is good. And speaking of good, Foley is good. My #1 New York Times bestseller is available at bookstores everywhere right now. Bang, bang!
Today's show, tonight's show, tomorrow's show.
Oh, no, I believe you're correct. But I have gotten words from
Okay, that's how you guys right.
Now, I know today is not like some of the last weeks have been for you. You know, today's show, tonight's show, tomorrow's show. If they had one, you're on them all. How does that feel?
Well, I've been interviewed by Katie Couric. You, sir, are no Katie Couric. No, it's been really wonderful. The last book I had, which went to #1, was Have a Nice Day, and I was a little frustrated by the fact that I thought it was an important book, if for no other reason than it was me writing it, which was kind of revolutionary for a sports or a sports entertainment guy to be doing his own work, and I was like, it was ignored. And now it's like, well, I have nothing really to complain about, so I'm freer to sit back and enjoy it this time around.
Is that difficult, not having an angst point to focus on?
A little bit. You know, I'm still like, I'm still kind of grinding an axe. It looks like I'm going to make it on the Regis show. That was my last stand there. I was like, they had 5 days for the WWF cookbook. I'm a #1 best-selling author. So now I'm on Regis. So really, the walls are all down now. I can die peacefully.
Do you feel like that's kind of like your career, though? You had to fight for everything and claw and scratch, and it's almost like you continually had an axe to grind of some sort, and now here you are.
Yeah. A lot of the reason I retired, I mean, part of the reason I retired was because I did have that driving force, the idea that I wasn't appreciated, financially especially, and that other guys who were not achieving what I was were being compensated more handsomely, and that did keep me going. And then it was like I wrote the first book, and I kind of sat back and realized I've pretty much done everything I set out to do, and I did finally have a real good year, a couple of real good years, so it made retiring economically more feasible, and I never dreamt that the books would do this well. The book world never dreamt the books would do this well, and so it's kind of put me in a position where I have another career where I can at least make a little bit of a living and do something I love to do, which is write, and I don't get hurt doing it, except for those hand cramps, because I do it by hand, you know.
I was going to say, does your body thank your mind for coming to this realization?
Yeah, I feel a lot better, a lot better than I did a year ago. I look back sometimes and I think, you know what, if I had wrestled one more year, I probably would have made a lot of money, but I have very little doubt that if I had wrestled that one last year, that there wouldn't be much left of me physically or mentally. And so it's, you know, that saying like, oh, how much is enough, you know, as far as money? It's like, maybe I don't have enough, but, you know, I'm almost there. And to kind of keep on going, and, you know, then it'd be just become a matter of being greedy.
The financial aspect that you talked about, you almost have enough, but not quite.
Not quite, but I think Dennis Miller explained it best when he said, how much is enough? I don't know, but I'll let you know when I get there. And so I have a feeling that no matter how much would never be enough. So I sat back and said, you know what, I made more than I ever thought I would. I saved money on haircuts and clothing over the years. So I sat back and, you know, did what I thought was appropriate, which is conceive another child.
Very nice. Money aside, there was other reasons, obviously, you did what you did for so many years and did it with such passion. It was not about the money.
Right.
Maybe chasing the money, but it wasn't about the money for so many years. Is there any part of you left that wants that back again? Because in wrestling or a lot of other things, when you retire, you never really retire.
That's definitely true. I think that's the hardest thing guys have to deal with is no more bright lights, no more fans, no more crowds chanting your name like Foley. You know, well, you know the chant. You've probably done it yourself a few times.
Once at the DC Armory a long time ago.
I'm lucky because I came back as a commissioner and actually got more cheers than I ever did as an active wrestler. And I also look at the writing process as being every bit as fulfilling. That maybe it's not the instant gratification of a big roar after I do a good move, even though towards the end of my career those big roars were fewer and further between. Right. But I love the idea of writing something that I think is either funny or important, and looking into the future of people reading the book and either nodding their head or laughing out loud. You know, when I hear about somebody laughing out loud on an airplane, that's very rewarding to me.
All right, the fact that this is not funny, but very to the point, Mr. Sacco. A lot of people laughed,
right?
But you kind of hated it after a while.
You know, I hated it after a while because I didn't want to be seen as the guy who carried the sock. You know, I described my career as 14 years of reaching for the stars and 1 year of reaching for a sock. And it was not the way I wanted to be remembered, and it was nice that I was able to have 2 big matches with Triple H under my old Cactus Jack persona. And then when I came back as commissioner, I was like now freer to embrace my nerdy nincompoopish, which is a literary word.
Yes.
#1 best-selling author came up with, nincompoopish side. And so I look at that as like, that's kind of my contribution to society, is to try to present a role model for losers.
And how are you doing?
Pretty well, you know, pretty well. I hope, you know, I never presented myself as a role model when I was wrestling, but I am trying to hopefully show people, look, you don't have to be cool or say a lot of bad words or even look good in a Speedo in order to be accepted by your peers. And
matter of fact, it may be easier to be accepted by your peers.
Without the Speedo.
And all the rest.
I don't accept anybody in a Speedo.
I didn't get to the end of the book, so it may well be in there, but tell me about how you equate the fact that now you are, in one sense, when you come out, the king of the cheap pop.
Right.
But in reality, you've earned some of the largest and most genuine pops that anyone will ever get in this sport.
Yeah, I worked really, really hard for those pops, and many of those years were spent with very small pops because they were very small crowds. Yeah. And so I feel like I did my share of working for them, and so I have no qualms whatsoever about getting the cheap pop. And to me, a cheap pop is only cheap if you're being deceptive to the audience. By acknowledging that they're cheap, it makes it a very valuable pop.
Because you're being interviewed today right here in Washington, D.C. Yeah, they go nuts. Are you going to come back?
To wrestle?
Yeah.
You know, I might, simply because a lot of the focus of the show is on me from time to time, and we have an avenue, professional wrestling, where it's inevitable that scores are settled in the ring. I mean, that's what we do. If we talk things over like gentlemen, we'd be kind of out of a show, and millions of people would be out of a pretty good form of entertainment, family entertainment as far as I'm concerned. And so I think, yeah, you might see me back in there, and for people to expect me to be the guy I once was is probably unlikely, but I could go in there and pull out the sock and feel pretty good about it. Okay.
Your book, one of the things I think that's intriguing about it is that you have nothing built up amongst yourself or inside of yourself that won't allow you to write just about anything that you've experienced or that's happened to you, including having slept with the Blue Meanie. That goes a ways to admit that, my man.
On my the night I won the title, I ended up sleeping with the Blue Meanie. And I saw the Blue Meanie yesterday. He was very flattered by the fact. For those of you who don't know, it just meant that I showed up ready to celebrate the old-fashioned way with a high cholesterol meal and a pay-per-view movie. And I saw the Blue Meanie in the hallway. And there were no rooms. There was no room at the inn for the Blue Meanie. And I made a decision, and I invited him in. I had about 8 pounds of Chinese food to share. And then I kind of did the manly, all right, we'll sleep in the same bed, but I'm going to turn my back, sleep on the very edge.
You're a brave soul. A textbook of modern society. That kind of concept of how does your book relate? What did you find out in writing that about what you do and then what society perceives you to do and what society is in your mind?
Well, I think that's where the subtitle comes in. The real world is faker than wrestling. Even though Jay Leno was nice enough to point out that that's not grammatically correct. But that's the way I would say it. So that's the way it showed up. I found out that, you know, here's a business that is supposed to be fake. And in fact, it turns out it's a lot more legitimate than other businesses, like the legal profession, politics, the book world.
Television.
Television.
There's a lot of references to, I would say not sexual references, but your analogies are interesting, like the hardness of a breast that has every bit the comeback punch of a Steve Austin, and I just butchered it, but you know what I'm talking about.
Do you want me to explain the story?
Yeah, tell me that.
Well, we get a lot of criticism. The Parents Television Council, is really on our case, and I think I do a very good job in the book of refuting a lot of what they say, making it not only misleading but also fraudulent. And they label me, they don't specifically label me, but in a lot of cases they say they went to a peep show and they did a skit at a topless bar. To me, just because you're doing a skit at a topless bar doesn't make it offensive, just as doing a skit in a church wouldn't necessarily make it wholesome. The comedy is what you make it. And to me, there's a lot of good comedy to be mined out of topless bars. And in this case, the comedy was that Al Snow and I had hit the jackpot in Las Vegas. So the couple losers we show up with a mountain of quarters at the bar, and I'm tipping like, hey, more where this came from, baby, and she ends up taking the quarter and hitting me in the eye with it, and I did the old Marsha Brady, oh, my eye, and it was funny.
Right.
But the story you're talking about is the dancer, not knowing that she needed to be clothed for this segment, came up as I was talking to someone and gave me like 4 rapid-fire shots to both sides of my face with her man-made memories. And
right.
And I said, yeah, they stung every bit as much as a series of Austin comeback punches, which means when Austin's on the comeback and that adrenaline's going, those punches that people think are fake are actually very, very damaging. Can we say memories on television?
Yes, you can. You just did. How did other guys react to it? I mean, did Austin come out? I mean, we know Al Snow talks to you about this stuff,
yeah.
but I mean, how do the other guys react? Tell me about that.
Well, there are situations where the jokes seemed somewhat more humorous when I was writing them on an airplane than they seem now the book's out in print and I'm alone with Billy Gunn in the dressing room. But most of the guys, it's not a malicious book. I mean, there are a couple little jabs that hurt, but as far as Al Snow, there's a chapter with a rather provocative title that we were talking about beforehand, and I asked Al for permission to tell the story, and Al went, go ahead, you're probably just going to do it anyway, which is his way of acknowledging that it's actually good for his career, and now the wrestler Test gets made fun of quite a bit, and he is now adopting the Al Snow pretend to be mad but actually realize it's good for his career, which it is.
Do you feel like, here's another line, and you tell me if I butcher this one too, the head throbbing of like a boner of a 14-year-old guy. Again.
Now, I know you can't say that on television.
No, you can't. You're not going to hear that question, but I mean, that type of, explain to me how the mind is working to get to that point.
I can't really tell you how my mind works. I mean, when I sit down with the pen and paper, and the reason it works so much better than an as told to book or written with is there's no way to get the thought process on a tape recorder that I can get sitting down and thinking. I just have a good connection, I think, with the pen and paper. So I'm willing to admit my literary shortcomings, but I'm also willing to say I do tell a good story and I do make some good analogies, and the book will make people laugh and in some cases think a little bit.
What do you think it makes them think about? What do you want them to think about?
I want them to think, in the end especially, the epilogue, I want them to think about the media's ability to turn a bunch of half-truths into one big lie in some case. And I also want them to think, maybe not even on a conscious level, but about maybe being a little nicer to people. Maybe that's a too broad of a goal, but I am hoping, and I was consciously thinking, you know what, if I can tell my story and be funny and be accepted and it comes across, I mean, there's some really nerdy stuff in there. You know what I mean? It's almost like Ivory, the lady wrestler, said it's like mixing the peas in with the chocolate. You know what I mean? So I think that people come away from reading this a slightly better person. That's my belief.
Because Foley is good.
Foley is good. The original title was Foley is Good Looking, and it got nixed. So Foley is good.
Which comes from Foley is God signs? And
yeah,
you just kinda...
the fans were carrying signs that Foley is God, and on the one hand, I appreciate that sentiment, but it's really inaccurate. And with all the criticisms that are already leveled against us, I don't need blasphemy on my resume. So I said, guys, you know, that's a nice sentiment, but slip that extra O in there. It'll be a lot more accurate. And that we were actually going to have the title with that O slipped in, but at this point in my life, I didn't want to give anybody any reason not to carry it.
Very good. Okay. You've written 2 books about yourself and about the sport that you're in. You've written a children's book that's a Christmas-oriented thing. What's next?
A novel.
Really?
Yeah, I've got a great idea in my head for about a year. I'm one of these guys, like, big believer in visualization. I don't want people to think that makes me a, you know, a weirdo. But generally, I have a pretty good idea of what I can and cannot do, and that's why you never saw me drop kick in 15 years as a pro wrestler. But I know I can write this book, and I started writing it, and I'm willing, once again, to admit maybe it's not going to make Shakespeare look over his shoulder, if he's even capable of doing that anymore.
He's in the room.
But I think it will be a good book that people will enjoy.
Can you tease me a little bit more about it?
Sure. It's about a young, awkward 17-year-old boy who may resemble me just a little bit, even thinking of having an auto accident where he loses an ear. And he is reunited with the father he's never met, and slowly comes to the realization that he's under the same roof as a monster. Not a monster like Frankenstein, but a very bad man.
Cain. No, he's not that bad.
No. But he's got to be smooth. I think the general public would think that a wrestling career leaves you prepared for nothing. When in actuality, there's some very valuable skills to be learned, one of which is learning how to tell a story. So, I mean, you might wish we had a camera in William Shakespeare's casket just to see him roll around in it when I say this, but I don't see writing fiction as being that much different than doing a good wrestling match. Because in a sense, you're telling a story. You're establishing your characters. You're getting heat on the bad guys, sympathy on the good guys. You give them a little what they call hope spot, and then go home with the big comeback. And if it sounds methodical, then I'll just say that method has worked for John Grisham for the last 15 years.
Amen. Now, I know ABC, every experience with ABC has not been a great one for you, but because we've had talks before, I'm going to ask you about this because we're doing a story on it.
Okay.
Your opinion, and I know there's an ad, a promo on the shows about backyard wrestling. There's a local kid who has his own little federation. He's not lighting guys on fire. He's not jumping off the top of his house. He doesn't have a bed of nails, but he loves it enough to want to do it. What's your take on being a backyard wrestler?
My take on backyard wrestling is that people tend to generalize all backyard wrestling as being bad. I would say the vast majority of kids are probably like the one that you spoke about, who are essentially going out there and pretending to fight with their buddies while their cameraman goes, oh my goodness, look at that, which is fine. People have done that for decades with very little damage. Unfortunately, there's a minority of people doing some really stupid things that seems to capture the majority of the media attention. And there are news shows that will air these guys doing these wild things, and I think you got to point the finger of blame at them because they're simply not going to air 2 kids pretending